How many of you are feeling the pain of administering phishing simulation training at scale? How many of you feel like you've reached its limit on improving employee behavior? For those of you who have to target a small percentage of high-risk employees or hard-to-reach employees, this session is for you. Our panelists will discuss a new approach to training, in the moment, when a potentially malicious email is received or a mistake is about to happen, in order to drive home a more memorable educational message. So over to our Tessian host, Will.
Thank you, Kelly, and welcome everyone. I'm Will Patterson, Customer Success Manager here at Tessian, and I am delighted to be joined today by two Tessian customers, Joe Mancini, Senior Vice President of Enterprise Risk at BankProv, and Ian Schneller, Chief Information Security Officer at Realpage. Now, Ian and Joe have both set forward-thinking strategies for security at Realpage and BankProv, bringing innovative and analytical approaches to managing risk. And of course, they both come to this discussion with an enormous amount of experience as renowned security leaders. Now, the focus of today's conversation is all about how to actively drive secure user behaviors to protect against increasingly dangerous phishing risks. So let's get straight to it. Ian first. Please, could you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your role?
Thank you, Will. Thanks for the warm welcome, and it's an honor and a pleasure to be here. I'm the Chief Info Security Officer at Realpage. We're headquartered in Richardson, Texas, the Dallas area, and we have roughly 8,000 employees in a global environment, and protecting our information and our systems across the board is a key role we all have. And the talk today I'm excited about because it's not just a technology answer, it's a people answer, and it covers the entire spectrum of a company, not just the information security team.
Fantastic. Well, great to have you with us today, Ian. So it would be wonderful to start with your kind of high level view on the challenges associated with getting your employees to understand about phishing, particularly some of the more advanced and targeted attacks.
Great question, Will, and it is always a challenge. And what I find is super important is to not start with phishing itself, but to make sure individuals understand that there is a very sophisticated threat actor out there. Might be criminals, might be nation states, but everybody will be targeted and everybody has a role. And so it's not just about the phishing, but it's understanding about the threat and then the vector the threat's going to take, which is usually going to be phishing or business email compromise, that every person has a role in. So I ensure that we talk about the whole picture and then about phish detection as a key means for everybody to have a role. And what helps in these is to talk about publicly reported industry examples where some kind of breach root cause was from a phish, and talk about what happened, publicly reported as a result. And that really sets the tone and makes it impactful. The so what actually shows up in those kind of conversations. And you have to realize that you have to do this continuously. It's not one time and you're done. Multiple engagements via multiple techniques is the key to continuously engage all your workforce.
Yeah, I really like that way of thinking about it. In that, I know today we're going to talk a lot about thinking about the human aspect of your employees, but also starting the discussion with the human aspect of the attackers as well. Who are the people perpetrating these threats? Makes it probably all the more real to people rather than just thinking it's a purely tech issue. And so when you're talking about these continual techniques to train your people and educate your people, when we think about traditional training and sending phishing simulation campaigns, what do you find works well? And where do you find there are difficulties with engaging that, hard to reach or particularly high risk employee set?
Another great question. And phishing simulations or phishing tests, I think, are a super important capability. That's one method you have to truly understand to the degree you've reached your target audience, which is everybody in your firm.
Mm.
A lot of things are helpful, but the big one is just start, do it, and cover your entire firm, and then have them periodic throughout the year. Pick a random time. Don't make them announced, otherwise individuals will start to get used to your campaign, and you won't get a great result. And then put in policy that you will do the fish tests and ensure you have executive tracking of the results. Management support behind the fish test is super important, as well as HR. And if you want to be very aggressive, I would say consider consequences. What happens if you fail a fish test? I'm not saying it should be as drastic or not. It's up to the organization of an HR action, but consequences might be increased focused training, more often. The key here, all wrapping this up, is to make this work, have simulation be a formal program with a dedicated focus and reporting to executives with trends over time to measure if you're getting better. One thing I've noticed in here, don't forget to track not just how many individuals click the link in your test, but how many individuals actually report the fish back to you. That's a very important metric as well. It shows you two different trend lines. Hopefully you see the number of reports going up and the number of successful fishes going down.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. It makes me think back to when I was on the other side of the table in a previous company. I think we ran these periodic phishing campaigns, and rule was if you fell for one, slap on the wrist from your manager. If you fell for two, I think it was reported to the regional head, and then if you fell for three, you went straight to the global head of HR. And what happened to me personally is I became, I think, so oversensitive that something could be a phishing campaign that I probably made a ton of triage for my SOC team. And then all the way on the other end of the spectrum, I've heard clients talking about cases of employees, interacting with a phishing simulation. Maybe there aren't those follow-ups or those consequences. Nothing bad really happens. And then they're potentially a bit desensitized to the true risk that's there. So curious to hear if, when you're thinking about these traditional campaigns, have you seen these phishing campaigns cause employee behavior to almost dovetail in this way?
Personally, I haven't, but you hit the nail on the head. It's the right balance. If you do a fish test all the time, it's going to have, in my opinion, a negative consequence. But turning that around to your other comment, a very dedicated attacker who knows you will eventually get you. And it reminds me of an interesting exchange I had with a close colleague at work. The last fish test, he sent me a note and said, I see your test, I recognize it, you'll never catch me, ha ha ha. And so I took that as a challenge, and I had the phishing team gin up one special email just for him, and he was phished within 10 minutes. And I use that as an illustration to say, as as alert as we are, the adversary is very focused, and they're psychologists as much as technologists, and they will know what's going to get you to take action, in this case to click a link or an attachment or fall for that fish. And so to a certain degree, they will get through, and that's where we need the other layers of defenses as well.
Yeah, that's such a powerful example. It's funny you said that. Literally yesterday, I was talking to a director of cybersecurity who had the good grace to admit that he had been got by one of his employees' fish tests just recently. So it's a great reminder, as you say, that you know these are the most security-aware people in our org. And so the vulnerability really exists very, very broadly if we're able to trick, even the people who are most on the ball with this. Now, just to almost flip this on its head a little bit, let's compare what we've discussed so far in terms of traditional training with the concept of showing an educational prompt in the moment for a real attack where we're actually kind of helping our colleagues rather than trying to, trick them. So How does that change the user learning experience compared to faux phishing campaigns that are sort of engineered internally?
I'm going to answer that in two parts. First, I have to go back to one of your earlier statements. When we run a phish test, the goal is never to trick an employee. It's not to fool them. It's to educate and gain awareness. If we put the goal to trick an employee, I will guarantee to have a very high phish rate because it is such an effective technique. With the goal of education and awareness, use the key indicators that we've all learned: suspicious sender, urgency, links that you shouldn't go into, those kind of things, to educate and raise awareness. So the goal is not to trick, the goal is not to fool, it's just to have another layer of effective defense. But here's the thing, a very common technique I see now, especially with business email compromise, is the adversary will try to drive a sense of urgency. This is very important. Do it right now. This will affect you personally. It might affect your benefits or your pay or health. Do something right now. Click. And the adversary is a master at this. They're very good at it. And where I see the prompt, as your example coming in, it might be a banner or it might be a pop-up that says, this might not be the right message. Take an extra second. What that does is introduce a mandatory pause in your internal thought process that makes you stop and think, even if for an extra second. And during that pause, what I like to think happens is the individual say, wait a minute, my fish training, is this a fish? I'm being driven to urgency. And oftentimes that very short pause is what takes to have the individual stop acting, thinking, and perhaps not fall for that fish. So I look at them as layered defenses that work very nicely in concert with each other.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely spot on, Ian. It's so important just to create that space for the individual to have a chance to think. You know, we've got these crazy busy jobs. We're trying to send out thousands of emails a day, and just creating that moment to have a second thought and a pause about the email is so, so important. I think final question for me, Ian. If you were summarizing, I suppose, the one key takeaway from this discussion when it comes to thinking about building phishing awareness and behavior change, what would that be?
I'm going to cheat. I'm going to give you one sentence, but there'll be several things rolled into that sentence. One is continuous awareness. Two is through multiple different means. And three is to have layered defenses that capture shortfalls in previous defenses.
Fantastic. Very nicely summarized, Ian. Well, thank you so much for being with us today. We have learned a ton from you. And now we move over to Joe from BankProv. Joe, could you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your role?
Again, as Will said, my name is Joe Mancini. I'm the Senior Vice President of Enterprise Risk for BankProv, which is a forward-thinking commercial bank for business, private, and cryptocurrency clients. I've been in banking for a while now, just really maintaining various risk-related roles throughout my career. My prior career before joining BankProv was as the CISO at Radius Bank, which was most recently acquired by Lending Club. So first time a fintech was able to acquire a bank, which is pretty groundbreaking. Happy to have been part of that organization and help them lead information and cybersecurity efforts around that space. My experience over the years have really allowed me to be part of some very exciting opportunities and partnerships, in particular as it relates to the future of banking and really use of technology to support the needs of our clients and employees.
Fantastic. Thank you, Joe. Great to have you with us as well today. So let's kick off right at, I suppose, the highest level of this topic. So when you think about the phishing risks at BankProv and indeed at some of the prior roles that you mentioned, what are the kind of key challenges that you see with reinforcing secure user behaviors?
Great question, Will. I think it starts really with finding the right approach for your organization, right? So finding that right balance between is it worth having some sort of cookie cutter approach, or do you really need to organize it based on your business initiatives and business strategy? So it's really about tailoring the training to the employee's needs, the level of employee and sophistication they may have, And really, as you can imagine, some may be very well versed in what phishing attacks or cyber attacks could look like and sort of threats. Others may never experience one before. So really tailoring that message to their expertise level would be ideal. And really, I think looking at frequency of messaging, right? So we talk about reinforcing the user behavior, but part of it is messaging, right? So how often are you looking to message and spread that awareness to the employees? Too often, they tend to get to a point where they want to ignore it. They see it too often, same message, not often enough exposes you to some potential vulnerabilities.
Yeah, absolutely. I think segmentation is key, right? And not just of your employee base, but also of the different types of challenges they face. And there's obviously this big difference between bulk phishing attacks and even, this blurred line almost between very unsophisticated phishing and spam. And then on the other end of the spectrum, these highly crafted impersonation attempts. So when you think about that sort of spread, what are the attack types that you've seen present the biggest risk to users? The ones that really keep you awake at night?
Yeah, well, there's quite a few, but I think we start more basic with kind of why these even become successful, right? If you look at the crux and really how this is developed, there's really three factors that come in particular for phishing and other related types of threats. So fear, trust, and greed. I feel like those three components in particular separately are important, but when they're brought in together, there's an element of each of these in phishing, right? So in particular with impersonation related. So bulk phishing is successful. All you need is one person to click on a link or respond to an email, open an attachment. But there's also, so you almost look at that from a probability factor, right? So there's some sort of success rate there. The impersonation phishing is going to be more challenging because spear phishing, as we know, you target an individual. So there's some sort of element of trust there. Typically, you might know the person, or you think you know that person that's sending the email. Could be an element of fear where if you don't respond to this, we're going to do this, IRS type of government or law enforcement type of approach. Or I've seen them sometimes where it's an executive, somebody portraying to be an executive in an organization saying, you were late or you didn't send this to me. Click on this link here, upload this document for me because I need you to respond. You get a message like that from the CEO of an organization. If you have an expectation of a regular conversation with them, you're thinking twice about how to respond to that.
When you think about these attacks and how advanced they can be, these genuine attacks, how can, in the moment, educational warnings change user behavior in a way that doesn't require our security teams to try and trick people with fake phishing emails?
And that's a great question. And it goes back to kind of what we're taught as little kids, as children, right? So your parent, you do something wrong, your parent addresses it, or something is done incorrectly, or there's something that could be addressed. It's done typically at that time, right? So it sticks with you. You remember it because of what you just did. So I think not that there's an element of scolding here by any means, but I think it does translate here as well, because if you're addressing an issue, a concern at that moment, an employee is going to realize, oh, okay, this is what led to that warning, and this is what led to that issue. Rather than addressing it at a different time or in a different manner, people tend to forget, right? So you may have to think back and what did I do? What did I click on? Oh, okay, that's, so rather than have to go through that, addressing it immediately by far is the best approach.
Yeah, we totally agree. And I think that this is the interesting point, right? Is that as a security leader, you have this wealth of different initiatives at your disposal to try and build security awareness with your employees. Phishing simulation, in the moment warnings, training out of a cycle, whatever it might be. When you think about the efficacy of these different initiatives you've taken in the space, I suppose the golden question for CISOs and security leaders is always, what are your metrics? How are you measuring the impact of this? So curious to hear, Joe, when you think about trying to influence human behaviors, particularly when it comes to phishing, what are the metrics that you use to track improvement in this space?
There's really a few that stick out. The more obvious ones are the number of emails reported, I would say, to IT or the security team as potential phishing. And I talk a lot about phishing in particular, in a sense, from an email perspective. We do have to consider the SMS piece of it as well, right? So there is that aspect of things as well. But from an organizational standpoint, we want to make sure that there's a way to track, some sort of user response, right? So I would say number of emails reported to IT or the security team as potential phishing. The other one would be, I would say, overall number of security incidents, right? So are we seeing an increase or decrease of incidents that have occurred across the organization? What sort of impact has that had? Is there a way to judge that based on recent trainings, or is it a newer employee? Is it an employee that's been here for a while that may be a little bit more complacent? Using those types of metrics to kind of make sure you're encompassing the total threat. And I think, click rate percentage, in particular related to phishing testing, click rate percentage, how many people failed, what sort of device did they use? Were they on, a bank-owned device? Is this something, were they on the network internally? So there's a lot of factors to consider here that, because even if they clicked on something, it may not expose the organization necessarily, but they may personally be exposed. And that's something that I think is important to incorporate is the personal element here as well. So when we consider education around phishing and any sort of cyber threat, I like to bring in a personal aspect as well. Not just saying, if you click on this, you're going to bring down the network in the bank, or you're going to expose all this data. But how is it going to affect you when you leave work? How is it going to affect you at home, in your personal life, your children, your family members, friends? How are they also going to be affected as well? So, how do you come across this? How do you report to it? How do you respond to it in the event this does happen outside of work? So it's educating them in a personal aspect. And I feel like that's really done a lot in terms of how we could heighten the impact here.
Yeah, spot on. And when you think talking to your board about how to, decide on what approach you're going to take for the organization, if you're going to summarize, I suppose, one takeaway when it comes to phishing awareness and education to your board, what would that be? What's the one thing that you feel most strongly about?
Well, when you're talking to the board, or that sort of level of internal, aspect. So I think the most important thing is, how is it going to impact business, right? So they are certainly going to be targets, right? Particularly larger organizations where their board members are on the websites, potentially well-known people, professionals, experts in these areas. So they're going to be, as you mentioned, they're going to be a target as it is. But also I think helping them understand how the threat imposes on your organization and what they could do perhaps to support the security culture. I think part of that, and one thing I haven't mentioned yet, is security culture in an organization, right? So it does come from the top down. So the day one of an employee coming in, setting the tone for security culture and having the right culture in place is critical, because and we could say culture, but it has to be acted upon as well, right? So you can have, just like a policy, you can have the best policy in the world, but if it's not followed, it's useless, right? So culture comes along the same way. It does come from the top down, and I think the board, I think helping them understand, what threats they're facing, what sort of threats, and how it can impact the organization is going to really speak volume to them, reputationally, legal risk, all these certain aspects that could come from potential phishing attack.
Super insightful. Joe, thank you so much. Really, really enjoyed that conversation. I'm afraid that's all we have time for today. But Ian and Joe, thank you so much for being with us today. We've learned a ton from you both in this short session. I suppose to summarize a few of the takeaways we've heard from you both today, I've been taking a few notes along the way. I think one thing we've really hit on is that it's crucial to bring your people along with you and create this culture, to bring your people along with you on the journey of building and understanding of phishing risks, almost as an extension of your security team. And this consistently trumps taking an approach of tricking your users with traditional training and punishing those who are fooled by that. Fundamentally, Joe, I love the point that you made around, as adults, we don't learn that well by fear mongering and punitive measures, but by becoming genuinely engaged in the moment in an issue that it doesn't actually take too much of your time. It's live training, right? So I guess in short, while as security leaders, we can't expect all of our colleagues to be security gurus from day one, what we can do is facilitate and simplify the journey towards that end goal. So that's all for this session, and I'll be handing back to Kelly, so don't go anywhere.